Hi everyone, welcome back to the Dish on Aging. This is episode 8, and today I will be answering the question that was submitted to me by a viewer. And that question is, how can I interact with members of my family when I have such different, very different views of the world than some of my family members do? Okay, by the way, happy Valentine's Day. Today is February 14th, 2021. So, here in Pennsylvania, we will remember February 2021, I think the second week of February 2021, as the week that all went, I don't know, particularly chaotic with the vaccination distribution locally. I was seeing a lot of frustration and confusion with some of the families that I've been talking to this week. Um, One of the biggest challenges is seniors are seeing that their friends or other family members are getting access to vaccinations and they are not. And also, we're seeing news stories about vaccinations here, there, and everywhere. Yet, those of us who are still at the front of the line on a waiting list are not hearing anything about when we can expect to get a vaccination. When people are calling different locations about scheduling an appointment, they're told that that location has no vaccinations, and so they can't sign up there. So that's sort of, and also I think I saw a lot of frustrations within families. Like, what do you mean, you know, you got our uncle, my uncle, your father, a vaccination and appointment, and you didn't get one from my mother. So we're seeing a lot more of that going on. I have been particularly frustrated with the news media talking about different information without realizing that the information about COVID vaccination access is changing literally sometimes hour to hour. For example, there was a news story that this week there would be 2 local hospitals would have vaccinations this week, and one of the presidents of one of the hospitals said, we don't want anybody in the public calling us, we're going right to the county list. And then the other hospital said, we want everybody to call us to sign up. And it just adds to the confusion. I may have been the only person who read the fine print of that news release, and that adds to the chaos and the energy and the anxiety about getting vaccinations. The other aspect that's not being focused in on is that when there's a news report that such and such a hospital has vaccinations, nobody's saying the number of vaccinations. So it might only be 50, yet that hospital may get 50 or 5,000 calls from people. Seniors who are on the list, healthcare providers like myself who are on the county list and not getting called, we sometimes are left with the impression we are the only person not being contacted. That's not true. Some of the local numbers were roughly about 1 million people in the state, 700 some thousand have both vaccinations, another 700,000 have had one vaccination, so we'll average that out to a little more than 1 million people. Remember, there are 4 million of us in the state of Pennsylvania that are at the front of the line, and so we are still waiting. 2 things to be optimistic about is the state actually health department made 2 changes. The first, and I think the single most important change, is distribution sites have to accept names on the list on the phone and online. What they were finding, and I was seeing this too, is that a lot of seniors who do not use the internet at all were being excluded from even looking for locations. So that's really good. The other thing that's really good is the state is going to start paring down. I didn't realize this number. There are 1,700 COVID vaccination sites in this state, And the state health department has realized that that number is not helping anyone, because some people are spending time on the internet, those of us who are eligible for vaccinations, and they are just going location to location to location online, and they may be signing up for hundreds of sites because they don't know what site's going to get actual vaccination deliveries next. So that is a summary of where we are. The chaos will continue, I believe, over the next week. I have been surprised my local county elected officials have been releasing several press releases throughout the week, because they're, I think, getting pressure from constituents about why can't I find my vaccination. The reality is we're still waiting for the vaccinations to be manufactured. And waiting for them to get delivered to Pennsylvania. The other problem with Pennsylvania, we are last on the list for the entire country in terms of efficiency. Part of our efficiency is thrown off, probably because we don't know how many people we have signing up for hundreds of lists versus those seniors who don't use the internet and couldn't get on even one list. That's part of the inefficiency. Also, the state health department is now requiring that when a site receives vaccinations, they have to give them all out within a time frame. Like within 3 days, you have to give out 80% of those vaccinations. There's been a concern I talked about last week that in Pennsylvania, some of the distribution sites might be holding on to the shots so that they have a second shot available, rather than keeping their fingers crossed that a second batch will arrive within the time frame, the 3 to 4 week time frame for needing the second dose. So that's the update. News that I am waiting for this week is for the Center for Disease Control to issue new guidelines for people who live in nursing homes, long-term care settings, and senior housing facilities about, once the seniors in that building are vaccinated, can they start? I would love to see inside activities with everybody wearing a mask to start to resume. I think that would be the single most important thing that needs to happen. Okay, so that is the update to the COVID distribution here in Pennsylvania, specifically. Now the question of today's topic, and that is how to interact with family members who have very different ideas about the world than I do. What do you do? How do you have a conversation? One of the first places I'm going to start is I'm going to introduce 4 concepts that are contributing to the difficulty right now that some of us are having in knowing how to relate to other family members. And then I'm going to give you some suggestions on how you can cope with that. The first topic I'm going to be talking about is the concept of a nostalgia room. And what a nostalgia room is kind of the generation that you grew up in, and the things that you value, and the things that were important to you when you were coming of age in high school. I'm going to go over these 4 topics, some solutions, and then I'm going to get into much more detail about the nostalgia room. The other concept is the concept of a generation gap. It is indirectly related to the nostalgia room concept, but a generation gap is going to be, we have the World War II veterans that are there, the baby boomers, the Generation Xers, the Generation Y, the millennials, and I think there's one after that as well. And the reality is, the reason why historically here in the United States we have generations that we actually identify by name is because socially, culturally, the generation that we are a member of will dramatically influence how we think about social issues. And that came to be based on how we were raised and what we were exposed to culturally, socially, and economically as we were children and coming of age into adults. So that impacts how we think. generally speaking. So people of different age groups, generations, you're going to have what we call a generation gap. And I'm going to talk about how to cope with that. The other concern that's coming up is that our world has changed ridiculously fast. I graduated from high school in the middle 1980s. I was born in 1968, so I was born at the intense part of the Vietnam War, was in high school in the middle 1980s. And wow, just in the last 35 years, how much our world has changed. Anytime the world is changing so dramatically, that is going to contribute to people getting really anxious, and then they're going to have to find ways of dealing with their anxiety. And then we're in the year of 2021. We just came off of 2020. And the vast majority of Americans we are out of our balance, we're out of our routine, we're out of our comfort zones, and we're also out of our social networks that we're usually interacting with. And because of that, many are experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression. When we are under stress, when we are anxious and depressed, one of the things that can happen is we can lose our patience, we can lose our ability to be flexible, and we can lose our kind of our centering. We can lose our centering. One of the things that when I was thinking about how to answer this question, we might on a Sunday afternoon be sitting and talking with a family member and hear an idea that we've never heard of before, like how many genders there really are, so you can't put a gender, people can't be put in one box of gender, and we're just not sure what to make of it. We don't know whether to get anxious or angry, or maybe think that person is not well. They might be a little, I don't like using the word crazy, but they might be a little bit crazy. And before this pandemic, then that parent or aunt or uncle or grandparent would be at the lunch table at work the next day and say, gee, you all are never going to believe what I heard at the family luncheon yesterday. And part of that conversation, you're going to have coworkers who'll be like, oh yeah, that's the way, my grandkids have been talking and for the last 3 or 4 years, and somebody else saying, yeah, I actually had to Google that 6 months ago to find out what that's even about. And it's a lot of this is very new information, and we don't have the ability, no matter what age group, no matter what generation we're in, we have not had that ability to bounce ideas off of each other. Okay, so these 4 things are all coming together to make it very difficult to sit down and talk in a calm, patient way with family members that have different ideas about the world than we do. And these, I'm going to summarize them. They're the idea of the nostalgia room, our comfort zone, with how we see the world. The generation gap, everyone is going to be thinking different because they had different experiences throughout their life. Many people, the world has changed too fast, and that's going to make some of us too kind of more inflexible than we really should be. It may make it difficult for us to listen to the point of view of other people, and maybe we just can't even keep up with some of these new ideas and ideas that are out there. And then the issue of we're losing the ability to kind of grow with ideas. And so there we are on Zoom, or maybe sitting outside in the backyard in the cold with a mask on, and we're on edge to begin with, and we're hearing an idea that just we find so upsetting or obsessive or upsetting or foreign to us, that we're ready to jump out of our skin. And so it's a great question. One of my viewers asked, what do I do? And the first answer I give is, you don't have a conversation with somebody about a topic that is going to upset you. Just avoid the conversation. Um, the other suggestion that I'm going to be talking about that people can do is um, to listen, try to learn from their perspective. The third suggestion I have is think back over the course of your life and the ideas that you may have had in your teen years or your 20s or your 30s, and how much your thinking may be different about any variety of topic, whether it's social, whether it's dating, whether it's marriage, whether it's raising kids, whether it's political perspective, whether it's taxes. Think about how your ideas may have changed very dramatically over the course of your lifetime, or maybe they haven't. And that's important to look at. One of the things that I've noticed is that some individuals, usually those were born in the 1940s and even earlier, it's really the World War II generation, to some extent the baby boomers, life stayed very, very constant for several decades in a row. I will be talking to people during the day who started dating somebody in high school, got married, worked at the same employer, lived in the same neighborhood, had all the same friends their entire life, all family members, all the same hobbies, and never had to leave that zip code. And so that probably also allowed them to have very steady ideas about the world. And so some of you may have very different ideas that you had at different times in your life, and some of you may have had very steady ideas. And when you're talking to other family members, they may be stuck in a rut, whatever their idea is. They're just going to keep it going for the next 40 years. They very well may, probably not, but they may. Or they might be just sort of talking. It's where they are right now in their life, in their development as an adult or a young adult. So the healthiest thing to do is you have to stay calm. So that means you have to avoid a conversation, say, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that subject. Then that's what you need to do. In a perfect ideal world, I'm going to encourage people to try to understand different ideas that you're hearing now from family members as being as much a product, if you will, of this world of the last 2 years versus the world of the last 5 or 10 years. And it's as much the world of the last 5 or 10 years as it is the world of the last 2 years. And think of other family members as being along a path of development, and whatever it is they're thinking, even though it's different than you, it really doesn't directly impact you. It really doesn't. So keeping that boundary in your own head, that's their idea, that's their thinking. I don't have to get upset. It's not me. I don't have to think that way. I know I don't think that way. And then part of a conversation I would suggest is to simply ask the person, can you help me understand that perspective a little bit more? Simply ask questions, and then part of the being supportive concept, without arguing, if you want to be able to try to bridge the gap, if you will, of a generation gap, or somebody's talking about a topic that is just so different than yours, one of the most important things to do is to be respectful in how you talk to that person about the topic if you're going to have a conversation about it. For many, many of you, you might be under so much tension right now that you're thinking, I just have to run out of the room when that topic comes up, and that's always an option. The other is to try to have an open mind. Gee, I can't, in your own mind, think, gee, I can't even imagine how anybody came up with this idea. And you could say to the family member, gee, can you help me understand where you're coming from? And I'm smiling because then there will be those of you out there saying, my best friend, my sister-in-law, my neighbor next door, they all grew up in the same generation I did, and I have no idea where they came up with that idea, and or why they think that way. And again, know your own sort of barometer. You know, if you just have to not answer the phone when it rings, or you have to just not have a conversation on that topic. In my opinion, my professional opinion, it is okay to do that this year. Because the most important thing is going to be for people to be able to stay calm, not get upset, and to be respectful of other people and their points of view. And the next best thing is to, if you can, say, gee, can you help me understand that? And kind of like an inquisitive curiosity. Um, Without asking too many questions, it'll be easier for when we're talking to our peers, because we might say, gee, I've known you your whole life. Maybe you've always felt like this. So you can say, gee, it makes sense to me. You've always felt strongly about that topic. Or that's a supportive comment, rather than saying you've had it all wrong for the last 40 years and you still got it wrong. Just don't say that. It's, gee, you always have felt that way about that subject. The other, also, it might be very interesting. It's also going to be relationship building and may help you to grow as well in trying to be less upset or on edge or tense about other perspectives, is to ask the question, gee, I don't, is this a new idea for you, or have you always had this idea? And then if it's new, ask them, well, what changed your mind about this? And again, don't argue. Whatever it is, it is. Um, they might say a television commercial, they might say something they saw on the internet, something that they, heard someone talking about in the supermarket. Don't argue with them about what made them change their mind. We have so many different things going on in the world right now beyond uh, our politics. A lot of conflict, a lot of change in our politics, beyond our COVID and getting access to health care, beyond how we think about, whether we should, how frightened we should be about this COVID or not. There are so many other topics as well that we'll have strong feelings about. It might be very new ideas about transgender sexuality topics. Also, just gender, what gender do you identify with? These, I had to look some of this up. I remembered when I looked up kind of different genders and transgender. I remember learning that in college and graduate school 30 years ago, but I had forgotten actually a lot of what I learned. And so we're going to be constantly learning and growing, and that is going to be, I think, our biggest challenge. So that was supposed to be a summary, but I went on for 15 minutes with that.